South Africa's top management is set for at least another decade of slow transformation, with very few new faces representing diversity in terms of race and gender expected until at least 2015. These are the findings of the Jack Hammer Executive Report, which took an unflinching look at the facts around South Africa's top executive in the companies as well as the broad top executives. To unpack the report and its implications, we are now joined by Debbie Goodman-Bhyat. She's the MD of Jack Hammer Executive Headhunters. She's in our Cape Town studios, and in the Johannesburg studios I am joined by BUSA'S Executive Director of Social Policy and Transformation, Vanessa Phala. Ladies, welcome to Political Exchange. Debbie, let me start with you. Your report paints a very bleak picture. It says that whilst companies are making the changes in the general workforce in terms of demographics, both in terms of race and gender, at the very top, the picture isn't changing. Tell us the main findings of the report in this regard.
Yeah, so we took firstly quite a narrow approach of looking at the top 40 listed corporations by market cap, taking a view and an assessment in quite a detailed way on who the CEOs of those organizations were, as well as looking at their executive teams. And then when we came back with the findings of that, which weren't quite frankly too surprising, your very stereotypical view of what the CEO looks like, which hasn't changed in the last 20 years, we decided to balance that with looking at a far broader group of organizations in the South African market, South African subsidiaries of listed international corporations, privately owned businesses, smaller businesses, in order to try and get a more holistic view of what's actually going on in the executive landscape. And came up with very similar results in that broad group, which therefore informed a more comprehensive opinion about what little is actually happening when it comes to the top role. I'm not talking about the broader executive teams. We're definitely seeing transformation happening across the board there, but when it comes to that key role, things are really not changing much at all.
I'm going to bring Vanessa in quickly. Vanessa, you represent BUSA. You specifically responsible for social transformation. The picture that Debbie is sketching is not one that suggests that we're making progress at the very top. What are the kind of glass ceilings which we're bumping up against from BUSA's point of view that informs this negative picture?
I think in terms of, and I do agree totally with the picture that's being painted, and this has been confirmed through various government reports, be it the BEE study by the DTI or the employment equity reports. I mean, there's still quite a very white dominance, particularly male white dominant at the top. And from BUSA's perspective, we do, have a transformation related activities, and the aim is to make sure that we bridge these gaps. But I mean, it will take some time. It's not going to happen overnight. And some of the findings of the report around the risks that many of these companies are not able to take by employing young, black, women into these top positions. But I think it's a matter of time that we start embracing transformation and realizing that in order for us to address the imbalances of the past, we need to transform. And what the message that we take across to our members is that transformation makes business sense.
Debbie, if transformation makes business sense, why is the word risk used when describing the potential appointment of a woman who happens to be black?
It's a very interesting question, and something that I've really had to look at and analyze and start speaking to many of my clients in that market to really understand their thought processes. The thing is that because organizations are answerable to shareholders, because there's a whole layer of accountability and governance, there's just a general risk aversion to making any major change. Whether it's at a conscious level, organizations firstly have a very solid business imperative to transform. Secondly, there is absolutely a strong intention. I know that whenever we have a mandate to go to market, the first priority is we're looking to transform. But when it actually comes to making that final appointment, the nomination committees, who are the board of these organizations, as well as the CEO who's potentially handing over, there still seems to be a lack of willingness to step out of the current mold and step into something new. And it's not about saying we don't trust that somebody different or somebody black could do a great job. There's just a reluctance and a hesitance to step into an unknown realm that isn't tried and tested already.
Vanessa, if the issue is hesitance and that there is unsurety about whether or not a new appointment will yield the same kind of results, whether the market will respond positively, where then does the confidence come in that says change in terms of demographics is that there's a value proposition in terms of business in initiating that change, particularly when it comes to businesses. I mean, you represent Business Unity South Africa, which is a range of companies, some I suppose who are guilty of the very thing that we're talking to here. What is the value proposition of initiating change for companies?
You know, as BUSA, we took a policy decision that we will embrace transformation, and obviously we need to work with many of our members, which companies and various boards that where you've got, representation through BUSA. And, we took a decision that when we do call out for nomination, for example, Debbie was talking about nominations, particularly into various boards or committees or council, that we will encourage our members to send in women representatives and particularly black women representatives, and we're following that. In August this year, we launched a Woman on Board training, and there we made it very clear to our members that we're going to run this training, and it's catered for black women, and the purpose is to give them the opportunity so that they can change the picture at the board level. Mm-hmm. And you see, as a voice of business, we sit at a very positive platform where whenever there is a call for nomination, particularly the kind of boards or committees that are tripartite in nature, business is requested to submit a nominee. And as BUSA, we need to be conscious about the need to making sure that representation at those levels reflects the demographics of the country.
Debbie, how does being conscious about the need to change the demographic translate into action? You were saying that when you go to market, there is good intention, but let's face it, intentions are not the same as real action. What is the impediment to change?
So here's the thing. We are definitely seeing, in terms of the executive teams that are actually reporting into CEO or MD, we're definitely seeing that those are changing in terms of demographics, female, black.
Vanessa,
and so
Debbie, just give me,
yes.
Debbie, break that down for me. You're saying we're seeing the change both in terms of race and gender. What kind of numbers are we talking here?
In terms of the executive teams, we haven't unfortunately been able to measure that accurately yet. So we've looked at the numbers in terms of the CEO. But I can say in terms of my general view of the market, we're seeing probably 25% of executive teams across the board, I would say. Once again, this is not hard data. I would like to be able to come back with the executive report for volume 2 in order to completely affirm that. But my general sense of having a very good understanding of what the general makeup is of executive teams, ExCos, I'd say approximately 25, sometimes a little more, the demographics are a little bit more representative. We're definitely seeing when it comes to roles, marketing, human resources, sometimes finance, that there is, as I mentioned, sometimes on the product side, there is some transformation happening in most organizations. The question for me has always been about, yes, there is substance coming through the ranks. When will the lights get turned on in order to make that transition of appointing from within and actually handing that flag over to a black or female ExCo member?
Yeah. Now, Vanessa, you work with the very companies that Debbie profiled. Change isn't easy. Change without pain is not a real process. Many organizations that have gone through transformation processes have a deficit of skills to navigate that process. You were speaking about conscientizing your members. Take us through what BUSA offers its members in terms of navigating that actual process of change that could be quite disruptive and quite, uncertain for many, many people.
I think I must indicate that, I think it's been 19 years into our democracy and 17 into our transformative legislation that we have, there is a willingness and appetite from our members to embrace transformation. Yes, there are quite some challenges, and like the study has shown, and many of the studies have shown, the problem is not necessarily about the scarce skills. I think it's more of the willingness to be able to take the risk and take on somebody who is not as experienced and somebody of a different race. And through our members and the project that we are implementing, for example, the Women on Board, we've called on our members to, for example, identify mentors that will mentor some of these women that will be trained, but also create spaces and opportunities within those various boards so that we are able to place the women that we have trained into those various boards. So also from our side, it's not just a training initiative, but it also has a placement opportunity to make sure that we do address this gap.
Vanessa, I've been speaking to people who do executive coaching, and many of their clients are either the person that needs to do the mentoring or the person that is coming through the ranks, that's the mentee. And there's a lot of conflict in processes like that. People feel insecure. Some managers, particularly white males, believe that if they train people, they're literally training their replacements. So there's a built-in, resistance to wanting to participate in the programs. A lot of black women who come through believe that they're being set up to fail, that they're being given these positions with very little support and infrastructure around them. What is the experiences of BUSA members? Are these the kinds of things that BUSA members talk about when we talk about nitty-gritty around transformation, or is it quite a static process where people just do number crunching?
I think also from our intervention is largely as the BUSA office at the policy level, but like for example through the mentoring project, and we do psychometric tests to make sure that we are able to identify where the gaps are and identify the correct mentor to be able to assist you with those limitations. So there hasn't been quite a challenge in terms of not being able to accept the process and the approach, because you might have certain fears, but there's been more embracement of the idea, and there's been more reception to what we're trying to do as a country.
Okay, Debbie, we've got a minute before the break. Just take us quickly through the kind of key findings in terms of the report that you've compiled.
Okay. Some of the key things are, if we look at the top 40 listed corporates, 85% of CEOs are white male. We expected in a broader demographic, in a broader group of organizations, that we would have a much lower number of white male CEOs, but in fact that number goes up to about 88%, which was quite surprising in fact. Then when it came to female CEOs in the top 40 listed corporates, we've got 5% are female, and that increases to a dramatic, wait for it, 10% in that broad group of other organizations. I'd previously been asked to talk on foreigners who were leading organizations in South Africa. There was quite an idea or a supposition that there were very many foreigners as CEOs of big listed corporations in South Africa, and that in fact is not the case. I think it's around about 15%, in fact. So that's quite low compared to what was previously thought. When it comes to educational background, and I think this is expected, but people with a commerce background, with a numeracy undergrad and postgrads, they're most likely to sit in the corner office. And then the somewhat expected, but once again verified fact was that from a succession point of view, if you are in the human resources or marketing, it's very unlikely that you're ever going to make it there. Because that's not the traditional trajectory in terms of entry into that CEO role.
We continue our discussion on transformation of company boards in South Africa and, of course, the boardrooms. Debbie, before the break, you gave us a breakdown of the major findings of the study. What I found interesting was the belief that those in positions such as human resources will never make it to the top position. The reason why I'm asking this question is I want to see if there's a pattern in terms of how succession happens and where people ought to be located to be able to be catapulted to the very, very top. What kind of positions lower than at the very top are the kind of springboards for people who are likely to be the successors for CEOs? What has the study found?
Yeah, it's absolutely. There are two primary areas where succession is most likely to come from. The first is obviously the CFO role, the person responsible for the finances of the organization, and then from the COO, the Chief Operating Officer. Sometimes the Chief Operating Officer is also accountable for finance and sometimes technology. It depends on how the organization is structured, but typically those two roles are the source pool for succession when it comes to appointment. If an organization is going to appoint internally, that's the most likely area
what I want to find
where the candidate comes from.
What I want to find out, Debbie, is if you look at the COOs and the CFOs, what is the racial and gender breakdowns there? And if you, let's say, compare it with, let's say, human resources and marketing, for example, is there a correlation in race and gender terms between those positions at the lower level and who eventually comes out at the top?
I'm going to have to be anecdotal on this because I haven't got measurable data. But the areas of transformation that happen quickest in an executive team are in support services like marketing and human resources.
Absolutely. I'm not surprised.
And the areas that happen slowest are in your technical areas, as well as finance and operations. So, for that reason, it's certainly one of the issues contributing to that lack of transformation at the very top when it comes to an internal appointment.
Vanessa, of course, I mean, this is logical. So, I mean, we shouldn't be surprised that the very top is a reflection of what is, just below it. Even though the information that Debbie was sharing was anecdotal, I doubt very much or whether the facts will differ, remarkably from what Debbie has just said. Is that your experiences as well in BUSA when you look at company structures?
I mean, we also did our own snapshot of a study in 2011, and honestly, the findings of this study are not so much different from our own study.
It confirms a lot.
It confirms a lot of the things that we're finding out, but it also confirms that some of the legislations that we have and the interventions that we've implemented have not been able to reverse the past and the balances that have been created.
And why do you think that is? Do you think the interventions aren't targeted enough?
I think it has to do a lot with, embracing what these interventions are about and addressing or dealing with the fears that some of the companies might have and taking these interventions as required in order to transform our society, to have a social cohesion within our society. I mean, you take, for example, Black economic empowerment. When it was introduced, there were quite a lot of expectations. The objectives were clear and possible. But now, so many years later, we're still quite slow in terms of achieving those targets. So I think in terms of the legislation, we just need to have more companies embracing transformation. I mean, within our membership, there's quite a number of members who are really transforming and who are really embracing transformation. But I think it will take many of companies to see the kind of change that we want to see.
Debbie, the two reasons that you give here, you're saying that it's not a question of scarce skills and it's not a question of unwillingness. In many instances, people want to embrace change. If it's not those two factors, what is it that informs this risk-averse approach to transform at that very top level? Is it downright bigotry? Is it the lack of skilled personnel in terms of demographics coming through at your CFO and your COO level? What is it? Is it a combination of all those factors?
Look, just to go back, I've never denied the skill shortage. I think if we look at any pool of potential candidates to take on a CEO role, there is always going to be, at this stage, a preponderance or a greater proportion of white male candidates who have the skills base. So the skills shortage is a real thing. Which is fortunate, because otherwise I wouldn't be in business. But that being said, there are numerous factors. Some are conscious, and some, I believe, boil down to what I refer to as unconscious bias. I'll get to that in a minute. First of all, risk aversion. I know that on every organization's annual report, part of their vision, their mission is transformation and diversity. At a head level, everybody knows that diversity is not only important for the transformation of the country, but it's also great for business. Right. And yet the switch is still not being turned on when it comes to those senior appointments, because it seems as though when it comes to that critical role, organizations would rather appoint an individual where the ability to minimize downside risk is assured, versus the potential opportunity that you could bring on board somebody different, somebody who's not cut from the same mold, who perhaps could really shake things up, change things, and perhaps even achieve outperformance. It seems that there's a trend, and understandably in many circumstances, where the risk aversion really just takes hold when it comes to that senior appointment. Mm-hmm. The second is what I referred to earlier, which is this idea of unconscious bias. And there's quite a lot of research out there on the situation where, on the whole, organizations, even at a senior level, but certainly throughout, I see that line managers at almost every level generally have a preference to appoint people who are like them. Right. And that is at almost an unconscious level. I don't think people are intentionally biased at all. I think that at a head level, intellectually, everybody is really trying to do the thing that they know they must do at all levels. But there's sometimes something that holds people back, of going, well, you're not like me. I can't see myself hanging out with you. Would I want to work side by side with you? I don't really see eye to eye. We don't come from the same place. All of those things that are part of a behavioral science that and this is not just restricted to the South African market at all. I think this is a global phenomenon, and I think the more conscious that organizations become of these unconscious, inherent, instinctual biases, I think the more they can start making decisions in a different way going forward.
What is the appetite, Vanessa, for making decisions differently within companies, particularly your companies that Debbie describing, given the fact that we know these things? We know that we like seeing our own image in the people that we employ, that we work with, that there's an innate sense of this person will be able to do it because she sounds like me, she looks like me, she talks like me. If we know that to be true, what is it that we're doing consciously to undo that unconscious bias?
Look, I mean, like I said, in many of our interaction with our members, we're not shy to really specify that we're driving transformation, and there will be certain programs that are specifically dedicated for Black people, for an example. So there is an appetite there, and I think it also has to do a lot with creative interventions to unlock that potential and also to open up opportunities for previously disadvantaged people. And like Debbie was saying, I mean, we also conducting some studies ourselves that will prove that actually transformation makes business sense. Because once we present that and say it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to go with the norm and traditional ways of appointing a CEO and the succession plan, but there is some case here to say if you do diversify, if you do transform,
your
you
business
can grow.
Exactly. Debbie, the position of women, of course, is always a lot worse than if you're looking at transformation only in race terms, considering that we have the 5% gap in the figures that we gave earlier. What accounts for the kind of low level of women coming through at that top level, considering that at a general kind of team level, women are appearing to make strides?
Okay, there are a number of variables that result in that very low number of women running top organizations. And once again, this is so not restricted to South Africa, this is global. But in any candidate pool that we're searching in order to appoint, even at an executive level, never mind even at a CEO level, we've already got a disparity of 70% of a market is likely to be male and 30% of that market is likely to be female. And that only goes downwards, somewhere between 90-10 or worse. And there's so many factors. I think we all know what those factors are. Often because women either hold themselves back because of the many responsibilities they have if they if they have families, and so they either step out of the workforce deliberately, or they hold themselves back in terms of taking on senior roles because of the many balls that they need to juggle. Or there is some form of bias, conscious or not conscious. I think in some certain instances it may be more conscious, where it would be just so unusual for an organization to take that step of appointing a woman to the CEO role. And there is so much data showing this globally. It's just too broad a topic to even cover here. There's so many variables that make this a global phenomenon, not just something that's endemic in South Africa.